Could you spot a psychopath just by looking at their face? Some scientists believe it's possible. What if the darkest parts of the human mind left visible clues, ones that are etched in our expressions for everyone to see? We're diving deep into the human psyche on today's episode of the Infographics Show. Scientists discover psychopathy and other dark traits show on people's faces. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. First of all, what is a psychopath? After all, psychopath isn't a formal diagnosis, but we throw around the word pretty regularly in life and crime procedurals. Sometimes when people talk about psychopaths, they're referring to those with antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. People who generally have low to no empathy, a lack of remorse about their actions, and a tendency to manipulate people around them to achieve their own goals. Of course, psychopathy also falls under the so-called dark triad characteristics. While dark triad might sound like the title of another boring fan fiction book series, it's actually a psychological framework made up of 3 distinct and unpleasant personality traits. The dark triad traits include what we call psychopathy, as well as narcissism and Machiavellianism, i.e., using whatever means necessary, including manipulation, to gain power. It would be great to be able to tell who is and isn't a psychopath just at first glance. First dates would be a whole lot easier. And science is increasingly showing us that when it comes to psychopath traits, you probably can judge a book by its cover. Let's start off with one of the most common physical stereotypes about psychopaths seen in TV and movies: the unblinking, wide-eyed stare. Is there really a psychopath stare? No, but there is a difference in their eyes. In 2017, researchers studied 30 men with at least one violent conviction, some displaying psychopathic traits, others not. They also included a group of men with no criminal history. All the participants were given a questionnaire known as the Triarchic Psychopathy Measure, a survey designed to recognize traits considered psychopathic in others. After researchers showed the men a wide range of faces, they realized that those who had violent convictions and psychopathic traits were less likely to look at people's eyes. They also took longer to initially look into a person's eyes. So if you see your date avoiding eye contact, maybe they're shy, or maybe they're about to set your house on fire and steal your cat. Though scientists aren't sure exactly why this is the case, they believe it could have to do with psychopaths' difficulty with processing emotions. After all, we generally look at people's eyes to get an insight into what they're feeling. If you can't understand what someone else is feeling to begin with, well then locking eyes with them won't do you much good. Other research backs this hypothesis up. A study led by forensic psychologist Mark E. Hastings found that psychopaths struggle to recognize subtle emotional expressions, like a face showing 60% sadness instead of the full 100%. While researchers expected to find that psychopaths would have trouble identifying negative emotions, they were surprised to find that psychopaths had similar issues identifying happy emotions as well. Maybe that could explain why both psychopaths lack empathy and also why they sometimes hurt others and don't really feel bad about it. After all, if they literally can't see how sad their actions made someone, how could they know? Another study in 2020 looked at men with psychopath traits interacting with real-life subjects, and they found the same results as the study that had men look at photos. Those with higher psychopathy scores made less eye contact when talking to others. So, why are psychopaths always portrayed with a wide-eyed stare? Well, it might be for a reason beyond their control, like the dilation of their pupils. Now that might sound crazy, but a 2018 study showed that in 82 men with psychopathic traits, pupil dilation, when the pupil gets bigger, was reduced when they were shown negative images. Another study looked at 120 men, split between those with and without psychopathic traits, and they had them listen to a series of sound clips. Some were neutral, like gentle rain, others were positive, such as laughter, and some were unmistakably negative, like clips of people screaming. Well, negative to most people, we guess. In both groups, their pupils dilated when hearing positive clips, but when the clips were played of people screaming, those with psychopathic traits had less pupil activity, if any at all. Scientists believed that meant their nervous system's response to upsetting things happening was muted, as pupils usually dilate in preparation for the fight, flight, or freeze response. Perhaps that is why we have the stereotype of a psychopath stare. The darkest part of their eyes doesn't get any wider when looking at something horrifying, making their eyes appear wider and whiter. And that's not even the end of psychopaths' weird eye issues. If you always suspected that people who wear sunglasses indoors are psychos, it turns out you're right. A fair amount of studies have found that psychopaths have increased sensitivity to light. Dr. Naomi Murphy, the founder of Octopus Psychology, says it's not that unusual for people with psychopathy to wear dark shades even when indoors. One of the many reasons you should leave your shades at home when going into the bar. Another reason could be that sunglasses conceal psychopaths' lack of eye contact, and it prevents others from seeing in through the windows of their soul. Thus, it stops them from unwittingly giving away information they don't want to give. But psychopathy is far from the only disturbing trait that people can possess. So what about more specific dark traits? Is there any way to tell if, for example, someone is a narcissist? Since according to TikTok, almost everyone you've ever met is one. Well, it turns out, yes, you can identify a narcissist by their eyebrows. Researchers at the University of Toronto had 40 undergraduate students take the Narcissistic Personality Inventory test to see where they ranked on a narcissism scale. Then they photographed the students without makeup and with neutral expressions. The photographs were shown to other participants, who were asked to rate how narcissistic they thought each person was. For whatever reason, participants were almost always able to accurately assess a person's level of narcissism based on their eyebrows' distinctiveness. Now, this mostly came down to brow thickness and how dense the hair was. To make sure that they weren't getting false positives, researchers digitally swapped eyebrows between the photos, and sure enough, the results stayed consistent. Narcissists with thinner, less defined brows were suddenly seen as less narcissistic. Meanwhile, ordinary faces that got bold, dense brows were perceived as more narcissistic. Scientists were at a loss to explain why eyebrows could give away a narcissist. One of the only reasons they could come up with boils down to grooming. Narcissists are more likely to take good care of their appearance, and that may include making sure their eyebrows are thick, healthy, and brushed out. As the study authors wrote, individuals reporting high levels of narcissism tend to wear more fashionable, stylish, and expensive clothing, have a neater, more organized appearance, and they look more attractive. The last of which we'll get to soon to discourage you from ever going on a date again. However, researchers also concluded that the distinctiveness of people's eyebrows also influenced whether others saw them as narcissists even when they weren't. So if you're someone who is well-adjusted and you like your eyebrows really thick and well-groomed, well, just know that some people might be judging you. But what about the features that can't easily be changed? Are there any genetic physical traits that give someone's dark traits away? It turns out there are at least two. Researchers at Beijing University of Chinese Medicine recruited 904 participants to take a 16 personality factor questionnaire that measured various personality traits. Then they used facial analysis software to automatically measure some of their features. The first one they wanted to examine was the facial width to height ratio, known as FWHR, which multiple studies have linked to questionable personality traits. The FWHR is an indication of how wide someone's face is relative to its length. Studies have found that people with overall wider faces are more likely to engage in unethical behavior, as well as behave in a dominant, aggressive, and risk-taking manner. The Beijing study found another interesting correlation. FWHR had an important negative correlation with sensitivity scores. In other words, the wider-faced people, they tend to be more insensitive. Strangely enough, this correlation only held true for men. Researchers could find no statistically significant correlation for women with their wider faces. They theorized that this gender difference exists because FWHR, particularly in men, is impacted by testosterone. Wider faces in men may indicate a lot more testosterone, which can be linked with personality traits like aggression and dominance. Meanwhile, wider faces in women indicate a much lesser degree of the hormone. Also, in 4 separate studies on FWHR, study participants could predict aggression in the faces they were viewing much faster than trustworthiness, indicating that perhaps a face seeming untrustworthy was judged only in relation to how aggressive the person seemed in the first place, while having, and we have to emphasize this, completely neutral facial expressions. This correlation between FWHR and aggression was quite high as well, rated moderate to strong depending on the study. Evolutionarily, this makes a lot of sense. Early humans didn't have the time for misunderstandings. Being able to instantly size up whether someone was just passing through your hunting ground or about to stab you with a spear seems like a good survival trait to have. Another surprising factor is that men with wider faces scored significantly lower on self-reliance. That is unexpected, considering society often links broader faces and higher testosterone with self-reliance. But the data suggests otherwise. In fact, it might explain why men with wider faces tend to rely on more dominance, aggression, and even unethical behavior to get what they want. Instead of solving problems themselves, they might be more inclined to manipulate others a classic dark trait behavior. That being said, it's almost certain that there are other facial cues that give away dark traits, ones that we haven't discovered yet. Well, how do we know? Because even when we can't point out why, we can detect these traits in others' faces. Well, at least most of the time. One 2018 study, the result of a 3-country collaboration, presented photos of almost 120 people to a group of participants. They were asked if they could accurately and separately rate how narcissistic, psychopathic, and Machiavellian each person in the photo was. The results were shocking. Participants were surprisingly good at rating how narcissistic both male and female subjects were based just on their photos. However, they couldn't distinguish Machiavellian people from non-Machiavellian people almost at all. The really interesting result emerged when it came to psychopathy. Participants were pretty good at finding men with high scores of psychopathy. When it came to women, though, things were different. Not only were they worse at identifying psychopathy, they were actually less likely to correctly identify female psychopaths based on facial recognition than if they had just guessed by chance. That means that something in the women's facial traits were actively leading people to guess that psychopathic women were not psychopaths, and vice versa. So if you have ever wondered why some men go for obviously crazy girlfriends, it's all in the face. They might actually think they're choosing well. And to be fair, both genders seem to fail when it matters most, identifying those who have all 3 of the dark triad traits. And what's behind this failure? Well, the fact that those with dark triad traits tend to generally look attractive, and humanity's judgment generally goes out the window when they see a pretty face. One study in the journal Personality and Individual Differences asked people to rate strangers' trustworthiness based on their faces and brief interactions with them, while also playing trust games. The scientists had already assessed these strangers for a variety of traits, including the 3 dark triad traits. What the researchers found was discouraging to say the least. Individuals who had all 3 dark triad traits were consistently rated as some of the most trustworthy, and that rating was almost purely based on the dark triad individuals having attractive faces. As Adler University psychology professor Jason Walker explains, we are hardwired to associate attractiveness with trust, a psychological shortcut known as the halo effect. Now, to be clear, the study in no way implied that all the attractive people have narcissistic, psychopathic, and Machiavellian traits, but rather that those who did have those traits were more likely to be handsome and pretty. The researchers initially thought that the answers might lie in the dark triad subjects' behavior. The almost 600 study participants had brief interactions with them, and it made sense that the narcissists and the manipulators would be able to make good, charming impressions on people in short encounters. However, even when scientists accounted for these manipulation tactics and general charming presentation, the participants were still likely to trust the faces of the dark triad subjects. Hunan Normal University psychology professor Chi Wu, the leader of the study, said their faces still prompt greater trust even when other traits like dominance, extroversion, and attractiveness are accounted for, suggesting facial features have a unique influence on how trustworthy people are perceived. Unfortunately, we still don't know what exactly those facial features are that prompt trust in very untrustworthy individuals. At least we can detect a few giveaways in people's faces, so maybe now we can finally develop more scientific warning systems to know if someone has dark triad traits. Even if we don't have facial characteristics exactly down to a science, this still seems like enough information to start filtering people's personalities and potentially troubling characteristics by face alone, right? By human judgment, or even AI? Well, yes and no. Multiple studies and almost everyone's life experiences have shown that people have been making snap judgments on others by appearance alone, especially facial appearance, for as long as humans have been around. One August 2024 study brought up some findings on life outcomes purely based on facial appearance that were honestly terrifying. For example, people perceived as less agreeable based on their appearance were more likely to get guilty verdicts in court, regardless of their actual guilt. People who looked less trustworthy were more likely to get the death penalty. Now that is a high price to pay for the shape of your jaw, or whatever it is that people are judging. In daily life, businessmen and entrepreneurs who were judged as more competent and confident based on their appearance received a higher percentage of profit sharing and investor funding respectively, thanks to that good old megawatt smile. Well, what's the big deal, you might think? After all, we just said that people can actually judge others' personalities based on their faces. But the problem is this only applies to some traits. As we saw before, people were very bad at detecting psychopathy in women and pretty bad at detecting manipulativeness all around. And even with traits that were judged more accurately, observers weren't right 100% of the time. Guessing someone's personality traits based on their face at an above-average rate still includes a lot of wrong guesses. Of course, first impressions only get you so far. Spend just a little time with someone, whether it's a new date or your overly confident boss, and those facial judgments tend to fade. You'll soon find out if that sweet date is actually a closet psycho, or if your boss actually has no idea what they're doing and is gonna bankrupt the department. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen as often as you'd think, because people are generally bad at reversing first impressions. The same study's authors said the results indicated the reliance on face-based judgments persists even when people are made aware of their inaccuracy and the far-reaching implications of such judgments. People form snap judgments fast, and they rarely change them unless they're hit with strong contradictory evidence from a source they trust. Some scientists are hoping that this human tendency toward bias and error can be corrected via the technology of the moment, AI. And in fact, AI has already been used in some breakthrough studies. Ivy League researchers did a massive study to assess 96,000 MBA graduates for the Big 5 personality traits. They searched directories and LinkedIn to find photos of these people, and they used AI analysis to predict the subject's future career success. The researchers assumed that personality would play a big role in the subject's career success, and that personality traits might be visible on the graduates' faces. Their AI analysis turned out to be pretty good at predicting the subject's school rank, compensation, seniority at the time of the study, and career advancements. Researchers also found that AI analysis of the photos was only modestly able to predict subjects' GPAs and standardized test scores, meaning the AI results might be less reflective of the subject's actual personalities and abilities, and more reflective of the fact that the people hiring these subjects may have the same flawed, biased perceptions as the AI that other humans had created. In other words, AI just might be making the same incorrect assumptions about subjects and their capabilities based on their faces as human bosses around the world are unfortunately making. That's what many young people, including ethics expert Dorothea Bauer, believe. When writing about the ethics of the AI facial study, Bauer strongly disagreed with the results and even the premise of the study itself, saying these models don't uncover hidden truths, they reflect and amplify existing biases, those embedded in hiring practices, social mobility, and law enforcement. The result? Biased predictions disguised as objectivity. Even some of the study's authors, including Yale School of Management finance professor Kelly Shue, cautioned against using the results as a basis for too much AI involvement in business decisions. Shue says, "I do worry that this could be used in a way, to put it lightly, that it could make a lot of people unhappy. I think our study may prompt the technology's use, although we are careful in the way we wrote it up, in that we are not advocating for adoption." However, no matter what Shue and her colleagues recommend, employers are using AI more and more frequently to screen applicants based on their resumes, cover letter, and other relevant submitted information. This means that AI facial recognition tools that claim to predict personality traits could soon find their ways into hiring decisions, criminal profiling, and even your next dating swipe. But given how often AI mirrors human biases, we could be heading toward a future where people get flagged as threats for having the wrong jawline, or top job candidates are ghosted because of facial symmetry, and dating apps somehow get even worse. Sure, these kinds of judgments already happen thanks to human bias, but handing them off to even more flawed AI models gives those snap judgments a false sense of scientific legitimacy. And AI models are going beyond simple facial recognition. In a groundbreaking project, researchers from the universities of South Australia, Stuttgart, Flinders, and the Max Planck Institute have developed machine learning algorithms that claim to decode personalities just by tracking eye movements. In a totally non-Orwellian turn of events, participants on campus had over 200 features of their eye movements tracked while they went about their day. This included features like gaze direction, number of blinks, and pupil diameter. Researchers were able to determine where subjects landed on at least 4 of the Big 5 personality traits: neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, just by using algorithm software that analyzed each student's eye movements. It seems the only one that they weren't able to accurately determine was the 5th trait, openness to experience. And if you're now anxious that your next job application will include a 24-hour eye tracking test in addition to endless application questions and interviews, don't worry. The researchers behind this experiment aren't interested in using the information to screen job candidates. Instead, they want to apply these insights to social robotics. Dr. Tobias Locher, the University of South Australia scientist involved in the project, says, "This research provides opportunities to develop robots and computers so that they can become more natural and better at interpreting human social signals. With this research, we can finally improve human-machine interactions. So there's nothing to worry about at all. Ever caught yourself wondering if you've got the telltale signs of crazy eyes, or maybe one of the other dark traits? Check out Sociopath versus Psychopath, What's the Difference? Or click on this video instead.